Hello and welcome to the Scottsdale Living podcast. I'm your host today, Dr. Enright. I own the Therapy Doctor, and I have a great guest on today who's talking about masculinity. What is masculinity? In the age of 2024, I couldn't be more excited to host this episode today with my guest, Nathan Smith, and the owner of Integrated Masculinity. So thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
No problem. I heard you give a commercial for your company and it triggered something inside of me. I have 4 brothers and 2 sisters. I grew up in a very military household and, total overshare. But the ideas of roles in gender were something that all of us were highly aware of. Saying that, my mother, being a military wife, was also in a very masculine role half of the time. She was the mother and the father when my father was out. And so I'm interested in this topic on a very deeply personal level. I'm a business owner. I feel like oftentimes my own femininity and masculinity are very blended. So this is something I'm really, truly interested in for selfish reasons. And then also seeing the differences between all of my brothers. The ways I see men even over the vast span of people that I treat and work with and are in my family, I'm interested. So thanks for coming on. And what is integrated masculinity?
Wow. So this is a big question because masculinity has a wide range of what it is and what it means and the roles and responsibilities. But integrated masculinity at its core, I would say, is a belief that men can be in their power and also be good, right? There's this idea that, there's a lot of mixed feelings about how men are showing up in the world. And let's be honest, there's a lot of men who aren't showing up very well in the world. And so I've been doing men's work for about 10 years. So I'm the co-founder. My best friend, actually, he and I started this company. And this really stemmed out of, we've been doing this work for years. And we noticed that men they were coming to this work and they were having the same challenges over and over. Sometimes we call that wound worship, where you just, you keep coming back to the same thing. And we're like, geez, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so we'd have all these conversations, after group, and we'd just be talking about ideas about how we could improve. And then it just occurred to us one time, we're like, you know what, why don't we start, not really a podcast, but we're like, why don't we start a show on Facebook? This was back when Facebook Live was still a thing. I don't know if it is today. We said, we're going to call it Just a Couple Guys, because he and I, we're just a couple of regular guys. And what we see is that it's regular men who want help. It's regular men who need help. We're not trying to go to the top of a hierarchy and work from the top down, right? We're really seeing that it's everyday, ordinary men who need support, want support. So we said, all right, let's start this show where we can start to get some of these ideas out there. And it was just a couple guys, and we did it for a while. And then we just, it sort of fizzled out because of COVID. And I ended up moving across the country. So he's back in New Hampshire, my home state. And it just fizzled out. And then he finally sold his business. So he owned a business. He sold it. He retired. And he was like, dude, I need something to do. And it's like, let's bring this back to life, right? Integrated masculinity.
Just a couple guys.
We're just a couple guys. But we see the need. And so we brought it back to life. And now what's really great about this is that it's come back to life as a passion, right? It's a passion project. It's something that there's so much energy around for he and I. And so integrated masculinity it's a space, it's a place for men to come to get the support they need to work through their shit, essentially, because we all have stuff. But not to get lost in it, right? To work through it. Essentially, what we do is we explore and we go through our past experiences. We go through the challenges we're facing today and our aspirations, so where we want to go in the future, right? And then we're working with what are the areas within ourselves, right, within our own psychology that need to be worked on. And can we create a safe enough space? And we say safe enough space because we're not creating safe space. Like, we do some really hard work. There's a lot of stuff that comes up. People are screaming their guts and their life out, right? This is not safe work, but it's safe enough, right? That we have to work with the fires we can touch, right? That aren't going to flame us out.
Okay.
Right. So we create a safe enough space for men to come, get what they need, and then the tools to move forward.
Okay. So since I'm completely ignorant and have no idea what this looks like.
Yeah.
You're talking about creating safe spaces, which is already an interesting term for me because we're also talking about masculinity. And to me, I'm having a hard time in my mind of ignorance, understanding, are you guys growing beards and swinging axes, or are you having an emotional session where you're talking about problems, or are you solving problems, creating challenges and solutions to call each other up and say, am I causing a problem that is my own problem? And I ask myself this all the time when I'm struggling. Am I causing my own problem?
Yep.
Or am I contributing to a solution for myself? And who's responsible for that solution?
Right.
So what does this look like?
Yeah, definitely.
Are there axes involved?
Not swinging axes. No, not in this particular group. So in a traditional men's work setting, it's not designed to solve problems. So, and that's part of what Jeff, my business partner, and I, that's what we wanted to rectify. We wanted to say, okay, let's bring these worlds together. I've been a high performance coach for a decade as well. And I've worked with thousands of people, thousands of hours of coaching. And so I know what is required to get men from, where they are to a higher level of performance. So we wanted to bring these worlds together. And so what it looks like is we start off tapping into that emotion, right? Because that's where the energy for change is. So we help men tap into that energy. We give them a space where it's okay, where they can be vulnerable, where they know they're not going to be judged, that they can release what needs to be released. They can take a look at whatever that perspective is. They can practice. They can take on roles that, they don't know if it's a fit, but they can try it on. They can practice it. They can put it on like a new suit. And if it fits, then they can use it. If it doesn't, they don't need to. But there's this piece that a lot of us don't get, which is enactment, right? We have to practice these new behaviors. And if we're not practicing them, then how are we going to learn them? So fundamentally is that we need the man to be able to have that breakthrough. He has to be able to look at what we'd call his shadow, understand it deeply, and then be able to transmute it, transform it. And then once he's done that, then we can take him with integrated masculinity. We can take him with the high performance tools and get him moving forward.
I just had the image in my head of Peter Pan. And so is Wendy Darling the conscience, or is she a mature form of something? You know what I mean? Like, so we all have the shadow.
Yes.
Everybody does, clearly. Is that past? Is that present? Is it something lurking, or is it an acknowledgement of self? Like, I am the behavior of the shadow.
Yes. So I think all are true, right? So it's a complex, it's something that was formed in the past, but exists today in the present. And we get possessed by it, right? It's when certain things happen to us, triggers, right? Then that shadow comes up and it wants to protect and it wants to do what it does. It wants to try and keep us safe. And again, that obviously impacts what happens to us moving forward. And so what we're doing in integrated masculinity is we're trying to help create what we call a generative man, right? A generative man is a man who is loving, caring, has wisdom, is concerned with what we call world building, right? And he wants to raise his consciousness. He wants to help others raise their consciousness. So there's sort of these primary ideas of provide, right, protect, and procreate. Now, procreation, not just bringing new life in terms of children, but what are you creating in the world, right? Because that creative energy can create many things.
Provide, protect, and procreate.
Yes.
Ideas, comfort.
Ideas, solutions, companies, businesses, opportunities.
I like that. I mean, that sounds very like what I envision of an ideal man. Is there an example of this that you feel exists in the world? Like, when you think of the generative man, are there people or role models that you think of?
Yeah, I'm not going to give any famous people right now.
Okay.
Because I think it's
important. That can change.
Right. I think it's important to understand that, again, this is every single man can be a generative man. And it doesn't have to be somebody who's reached a certain status in society. Because actually very often, not always, but very often those people who reach a level of status are not generative. They're actually doing things that create harm in the world, right? They're not caring for the environment. They've reached success, but they're greedy, right? They're exploiting they're not caring for people well. So, we have to be very careful about the role models that we look to. And so in this case, there's a man in my group last night, and great example. So he's an older man, and he just helps people, right? It's in his heart to help people. So that's the caring side of the generative man. The generative man is also capable. And so he was helping this friend, and I won't go into all the boring details of what he was doing, but he was helping this guy fix his chair, who, because of his ailments, he basically spends all his time in this chair. It was broken. And it required so much more than he thought. He's like, oh, it'll be a quick fix. And then one thing led to another. He's like, oh, now I got to buy this other part. Now I got to take the chair apart and like replace this piece and put it back together. And, and he was sharing how at one point he was like, do I want to do this? Like, do I really want to like go to this level? And then he just had the thought. He said, you know what? This man needs this chair.
And I said I was going to do this.
And I said I was going to do it. And I'm capable of doing it. Right. And it's the right thing to do. So a generative man is a big part of that is the selflessness, right? It's not about me. It's about something bigger than me. It's about that transpersonal cause. And so many men are just struggling, right? They're in crisis. And because they're in crisis, they can't think of other people. They can't think of being selfless, right? It's really hard. And so what we're trying to do is help men integrate all of these parts, right? Get them through the crisis, right? And we were talking before, it's this crisis of the disintegrating man.
Disintegrating. Not part of the whole, not giving to the whole, or crumbling, disintegrating.
Yes, exactly.
One, both? Which one? Disintegrating man.
So he's disintegrated, right? So his parts aren't integrated. So he isn't whole. There's an interesting thing, the word integrity, by the way. When we talk about integrity, the root of the word really means wholeness, right? So for me to be integrity, I have to be a whole man.
Wow.
And so when we think about it through that lens, it takes on a whole new meaning. I know it does for me. And so I think about, okay, so what does it take to come to this whole space? And the disintegration is all that stuff. It's all the shadows. It's all the stuff that's been broken off. It's all the stuff that I don't like about myself, that I'm afraid to look at, that, sometimes feels too hot to touch. And so by myself.
Oh, wow.
And so we push it away and we don't look at it. And then we get possessed by those different shadows. And that's how we show up in the world. That's when we react with anger and that spark and that fire. And that's the disintegrating part, because we're also breaking apart our relationships now, right? We're doing violence to the relationships. We're disintegrating at work. We're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're not keeping up. We're not as productive as we need to be, because we're too caught in our own emotional malaise, let's say. And a lot of men just don't know what to do. They don't know how to ask for help, right? They've been shamed to ask for help.
I mean, we clearly have generations of people, and still today, I'm 38, and I have a really hard time asking for help, because asking for help is weak. And I'm a woman, and people think of women as like, well, you could just ask for help and you ask your friends and you talk to them. It's still hard.
Yeah.
So that captures me already. And then you mentioned something like, obviously, each of us individually can create harm. You use the word violence on relationships, violence on the structure, violence on work, violence.
Yep.
Talk to me about what do you mean by that?
So and it's a strong stance, and I'm not sure that a lot of people
are we talking about crying about something, about a problem? What is violence?
Yeah, we're talking about when anger, which we all experience, when anger is directed. So typically anger will be directed in one of three ways: at an individual, right? Directly, I may be name calling, or it could be physical, emotional, mental violence. So it could be directly at you and very obvious. I could direct it at myself, which would be self-loathing, right? That's shame. So I shame myself. I should have done this. I should have done that. It's that feeling that I'm somehow not good enough. And then we direct it at a relationship. And typically when we direct our anger at a relationship, it's through passive aggressive behavior, right? It's through, I'm not going to connect with you in the way that I normally would, right? So if I normally rub your shoulders, or, if I just put my hand on your back while you're cooking, or all the, small ways that we show intimacy, I'm going to stop doing that now because I'm angry, right? And so if I stop doing the things that are, again, life-giving, life-affirming, right? Then I'm doing harm.
Hmm.
I'm harming those relationships because I'm not bringing my full energy to them, right? And that's a
Yeah.
choice. And so for me anyway, if I'm doing harm through anger, that is violence. I am doing violence to those different relationships or to myself. So when I think of it in that terms, for me, it gives me the understanding that, hey, this is important, right? I can't be doing violence. I don't want to do violence in these different directions.
When you put it so simply, it seems like such a simple, equation essentially. But when people are in emotion, it's very hard to look at a situation, zoom out
Yeah,
and look down at ourselves and say, what is it that you need right now? It's
right.
okay. Like we're going to figure this out. We've got it. We've got all the tools.
Yep.
So how do you go from the disintegrated man to the generative man? I love it in concept and idea. How do you catch the moment? How do you
Yeah.
identify, is it all about the present? Is it about the identification? Is it about
Mhm.
talking about it? Does this necessitate the need for a daily conversation with yourself and a chat? Like,
Yeah.
you're talking about elevating consciousness.
Yep.
Where does that start?
Yeah. Well, number one, it starts with the realization that I have to put my own house in order,
Hmm.
right? And that's what a generative man will do, right? He takes on that responsibility, right? He sees that if I'm going to be of service to a transpersonal cause, something bigger than myself, even if it's just my family, right? It doesn't have to be, I don't have to go save the world, but I need something bigger than myself. Otherwise, I become selfish and self involved, right? And all the trappings that that's going to have. So it has to start with, right, there's something bigger than me that I'm responsible for. And so, in order for me to have the biggest impact on those things, I have to have my house in order, right? And I'm responsible for that. No one else is going to do it for me,
Hmm.
right? And I spent time, doing it. And that was, in a sense, that's how I came into this work. Is that I didn't share the story with you, but so I'm a twin, fraternal twin. And when I was 16, my brother passed away, died in a car accident.
I'm
And
so sorry.
it was just and I can like feel the chills in my body. It was even just saying that. I remember I got home, I was the last one to find out. I got home late at night, pulled in driveway, all the people, families there. I'm like, what the heck are they doing here? It's like Thursday night. Something must be wrong, right? So I'm driving down the driveway. It's one of those things. If you ever experience when you're going to get bad news,
Hmm.
and you sort of do what you can to delay it as long as possible. So I'm sort of driving very slowly, but I'm like, I can't put it off. And my dad comes up to the car window, and I just get out. And God bless him. He was so brave in that moment, and he just said it right out. He said, "I had bad news. Your brother was in a car accident. He didn't make it." And I can feel it even now. Just what happened in my nervous system, just it felt like it just turned into cement.
Hmm.
And from that day forward, for a long time, I could play the part. I could play the stoic. I come from a big family too. There was 5 of us, and in order to avoid my own feelings, I became the one that other people could rely on.
You
Right.
came, you became responsible in a moment because you felt that was the role you needed to play?
That was
Or was
my
it for you or
it
was
was
it for
my
them?
coping mechanism.
Mm.
Um, I mean, a bit of both, because we all want to be caring and supportive, and I wanted to help, obviously, my family. But really, it was self protection. It was, this is how I'm going to cope with this. And I don't think I cried. So I cried the next day, bawled.
Mhm.
Um, I had one other session where I just bawled crying.
Mhm.
And then I didn't cry again for probably 12, 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, we're talking about all of these things about the generative man.
Mhm.
Clearly, the generative man also has many feelings. Like,
Yes.
feelings still exist.
Yes.
So you're talking about this period, and I do believe that what happened when you were 16 is the epitome of when Peter Pan becomes an adult, when he realizes that his
Yeah.
feet need to be on the ground
Right.
and he can't just fly around and think about himself anymore.
Right.
And in my mind, that happens when you become from child to adult, from whimsical to worthy
Hmm.
for the world.
Yep.
um, that it's always some life-changing event. It could be when, and I've heard this from adults.
Yeah.
I didn't know until I saw my newborn baby, my firstborn child. I didn't know until a death of a family member.
Yeah.
It could be a parent, it could be your child, it could be your sibling. But there are these big moments in life where you're called instantly to grow up.
Yep.
To grow up right now. You're
Yep.
growing up.
Yep.
And you don't have another choice. Is that the requirement for consciousness? Or are people now in 2024, are people now understanding this in some other way?
I think that the crisis that we're facing is in large part due to maturity. So to your point, growing up. So many men haven't grown up. And I mean, you just look at how we go into our 20s and with college and what are the, the stereotypes around college kids drinking and partying. And, we've created a society in which there's so much ease and comfort that
Irresponsibility.
we don't have to grow up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Unless something happens to you, right? Unless a life event forces you to have to grow up. Or, I mean, if you were fortunate enough to have, the kind of care and rearing and, parents that helped you with that. But in large part, there's this immaturity. And, and it's not about putting blame anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, so many of us are immature in so many ways. And that's it. It's the growing up. We have to grow up. And that's what it is to expand your consciousness, right? It's this growing up process. And if we have any hope of being a generative person even, we have to do the work. We have to, this growing up process, right, could be described as I move through stages of development, I either attach, right, overly attach to the previous stage, or I release and push away too much, right? So that's what creates addiction and allergy, right? If I'm clinging to the previous stage, I don't want to grow up, then we form addictions at whatever that stage of development is.
Wow.
Right?
That is just clicking right now.
Yeah. And then the allergy is
avoid at all costs.
Avoid it. Yeah. Like I don't even want it. I reject it entirely. And so, so we don't have a healthy attachment now. And so those are the parts that we're splitting off. And so we have to go back and revisit those aspects. We have to understand them in more depth. We have to see them more clearly. And through that understanding, we can now start to move through and do the work we didn't do before, right? Go through the pain that we weren't willing to go through before. And so that's what happened to me is I finally said enough and I'm going to get some help around this. And I remember I was doing this healing work and I was on this table and I was face down and it was in a big ballroom. It was at a hotel. It was like a weekend thing.
You're at like a retreat or a conference of
like a retreat for healing work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your brother
embodiment
passes
work.
away and this is 13 years later?
Yep. Probably around 14 years later this was.
Okay.
And so I'm face down and, the doctor, they work on multiple people at once and, they kind of do their thing and go away. And so he did his thing and he went away. And I just started to see this image of, my brother and my mom had passed away at this point too. And she had cancer. And so I'm just sort of seeing their images and energies hanging around. And then he comes back and he just touches me like ever so lightly on my calf. I could barely feel it. And it just, boom, it sparked. Like I just released. I screamed. I raged. Like that whole ballroom went silent. You could hear a pin drop because my rage was just filling that whole space. And when I stopped, it was dead quiet. And then the doctor came over and I was just bloody nose. I was a mess. And, he kind of got me back to stability. But I tell you that story because that's the emotion that so many men have locked in. That's the emotion that they're not letting out. And that's why, they show up in the kind of sideways behavior because there's so much unresolved anger and shame and guilt and all these things. And so if we can start to tap into those things again in a safe enough space where it can be contained, right? Because it's really important that we have containment, right? And you've probably experienced this too. If we don't have a strong container, this is true of relationships. If you don't feel a strong container, what's going to happen? You're not going to have trust. You're not going to be vulnerable because you're going to feel like you have to stay safe, right? You may feel like you have to start doing everything yourself if it's in a relationship, as an example, right? I have to create the containment, right? So we have so many men who don't know how to create containment, right? They don't know how to create a space. They don't know how to steward a space, right? So that there's safety and there's trust, right? He doesn't know how to show his command. So the idea here is the generative man has to go from the crisis that he's in to a place where he's in command, right? He can take charge of his life.
Of self first.
Self first. Self first.
Yeah, because I can't give more than I have. And I have to be able to take care of myself.
Yes.
I have to have a roof over my head. I have to be fed. And then once I have these things in place, these
Yep.
staples, the protect, provide, then I
Right.
can consider if procreating ideas and money and people and worth
Right.
to the world are something that are within my scope.
Yep.
Okay. I love this conversation. I love this conversation. Clearly, I feel personally that this does not just apply to men, but I love that
Yep.
you are containing your knowledge and your expertise to what you know, what you
Right.
feel, and what you can connect with. So thank you for that. I
Yeah.
applaud you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm so teary-eyed. Like, it's just so it's so relationally relevant. Everybody, well, I guess maybe not. You know, one of my best friends, her stepdad always says, "You live such a charmed life." So when she came to conflict, she had never faced it before. I love her for that. I
Mhm.
love her for the fairy tale portion.
Yeah.
I watch it with like awe. And sometimes I realize too that what that means is that I do believe that there's a certain darkness that shows light, like makes
Mhm.
it more beautiful
Yeah.
and makes you want to strive for it a little bit more. So for all of those reasons, it just feels so tangible to have this conversation. And that
Yep.
I personally do believe in trying to elevate, and it feels so stiff the air sometimes where you can't
Mhm.
have those kinds of conversations. So
Yep.
just such a treat to go from the idea of this conversation today into the depth that we have already is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
You're fantastic to talk to. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to reel us back into
Sure.
a little more of the superficial because I could go into this for hours with you.
Yeah.
I love this. I cannot wait for people to hear about it and want to make a call to you. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
So relevant. So clearly we've talked a little bit about why this work is so important to you. I have a gendered question for you. It is
Yes.
2024.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
And now I have questions about, are women contributing to a problem with the elevation of the idea that men can protect, provide, procreate in the way that they want to, that they deserve to, in the same way that I feel I have a certain role in the world. And actually, my role in each part of my life is a little bit different.
Mhm.
So, like you talked about containment,
Yep.
my role in my business is very different
Yep.
as a business owner versus I actually take care of people who are dying.
Yeah.
A lot of those people have made empires for themselves, and their focus is on the worldview of what they can do with that.
Right.
And it's also on themselves, on peace with coming to grips with what their life has meant, what it will be, and how the end will look.
Right. Yeah.
Like, wow. So
Yeah.
this is very full circle for me right now.
Mhm.
So in my business, I'm one thing, and I have to be that thing.
Yep.
I have to get it done.
Yep.
I have to make sure the tasks are completed. I have to have a certain amount of position and role. And then when I go home, I want to be the opposite thing. I want to be
Right.
caring. I want to be nurturing. I want to let go of the responsibility of protecting and providing for
Yep.
others all day.
Yep.
And so this is very like, it's just so apt for 2024. You know, I want both of those things in my life in a partnership. And I'm asking, are women coming home with the energy of work and coming home with the energy of business and coming
Yeah.
home with the energy and responsibility that I do believe that a long time ago used to be very role delineated, like very much more so.
Mhm.
are we causing part of a problem for men not to feel like they can be men, that they can be masculine? And if so, how do we fix it? What do we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a big question.
Mm-hmm.
I think for our purposes now, what I would say is that every relationship is different. And, there's a spectrum along which men have masculine energy. There's a spectrum on which women have feminine energy. We all have both, obviously. And in fact, for a man to be a generative man, it's required that he can merge into a healthy relationship with his feminine, right? That's essential. And a lot of that, as we kind of discussed, is that's seen as weakness, right? Men don't, a lot of men don't feel like it's okay to do that, right? They revolt against it. And in large part, that's because of their unresolved, wounds, right? But to your question, I think that, first of all, you have to understand what kind of relationship do we want together, right? Because it's not useful to apply onto somebody or to force onto somebody a modality or a formula for these dynamics that isn't authentically who they are.
So do our values match?
Do our values match?
Are we going to be able to grow together because our values right now match?
Yes.
I mean, and obviously over the course of a lifetime, if you're with a partner, that can change.
Yes.
Well, now we have children, so our roles may need to be a little different. Oh, well, I lost my job. My role may need to be a little bit different.
Right.
Like life happens, and that probably needs to be reassessed every single time a big change occurs.
Yes. Well, I would say every day, honestly. So the way that I do the best anyway to live my life is that every day is a new day. It's a new moment for me to look at myself, my relationships, how I'm showing up, what's needed, what does this moment call for? And we do our best to hold within the values that we feel are important. So for me, I mean, I have a lot of masculine energy. So I want to step into that role. I very much want to create that container. I want to create that space. And my lady, she very much loves the feminine energy and being in her feminine. And she wants me to do that. So it works, right? Because we match each other in that way. And so I can show up fully as who I am in that way, imperfectly. And she can then show up fully in her way, imperfectly. Mm-hmm. And we just do the best that we can to support each other when we're doing it imperfectly. And that's the graciousness. That's the caring, right? That says, okay, but if we can't regulate our own nervous system, then we can't do that, right? Then we're always in self-protection. So I think this conversation really is, again, understanding where do you fall in that spectrum, mm-hmm. what's important to you, mm-hmm. and also, is what you're doing working, right? Is it working? If you're creating that containment, and as a man, if you're being very dominant, right, does your woman respond to that? Or does she not? Does she rebel against it? Maybe she's got her own stuff that she's got to work through. Or maybe she just doesn't like it because that's where she is on her spectrum. Right. So I'm very careful not to prescribe any way of doing it, other than to say that these are the characteristics of a generative man. Mm-hmm. And, and he can ask his lady to support him in that. And he can say, here's what that would look like. Right. Don't also put it on her to figure it out. Right. Like say,
mind reading.
Right. It's like, here's what support would look like.
Uh-huh.
It's important. Like we all need to be able to set boundaries. And one of the things I see over and over and over again, not only in men's work, but also in all the coaching that I do is, this like men struggle to set boundaries. They hate conflict. They're so avoidant of conflict.
Wow. Okay.
And that's a huge issue, mm-hmm. right? Because if you're not willing to go headlong into it, you're never going to learn about it. You're never going to understand both the conflict as well as yourself, because that conflict starts within, right?
I used this phrase last night. I was talking to someone who was speaking about something. Essentially, someone slighted them.
Yeah.
And it was a person who I actually believed when I heard it that it wasn't a slight at all. It was actually a generous gift of wisdom.
Okay.
And it could be taken as you can take it, or you can decide that this is what you want and you can be exactly what you are. And it's
Yeah.
a really weird one.
Yeah.
So a minority
Yeah.
told my other friend who's a minority,
Mm-hmm.
you need to change your last name
Oh,
because it will be a barrier for you.
okay.
And he decided, I will not change my last name. This is who I am. It's part of me. I love that. He made a choice,
Yeah.
but he thought that that person was insulting him. And in my point of view, he was giving him a piece of understanding. This is the barrier you face.
Right.
From my point of view and my life experience, I've also faced this. And so it was interesting because it was a call to action. And the candor is the kindness,
Right.
the honesty that you have a choice and you can back off from it and you can take the easy way out, or you can put your heels down and say,
Yep.
this is who I am and I like it. This is
Yep.
who I am. I like it. And I actually am ready to face whatever comes my way because this is my choice.
Right.
And I do believe in that honesty and that form of integrity. And it doesn't mean that you can say whatever you want, hurt people's feelings. But if something is this is my belief system, this is what I need right now,
Mhm.
this is how I will feel whole, this is substantiating growth in the future for me as a person, then those are the things that need to be said out loud. You're talking
Yes.
about doing that every day. Wow, that sounds totally overwhelming right now.
Every day. Every day. Yeah, because I don't see it as negative. I see it as resolving. I see it as, there's this great line by Gandhi, and I won't go into the whole story. But effectively he was having a rally and then he backed out of it. He wasn't going to do it. And all these people had come and they were going to go, and his kind of lieutenant was like, "What are you doing? You can't back out." And he's like, "My commitment is to truth, not to consistency." And so often what happens is we get caught in this having to be consistent. And part of that is the image that we create about ourselves, right? We all have an image of who we think we are.
Yes.
And we want to be consistent with that. And if someone doesn't say or do something that validates that image that I've created, right? Well, now I get angry because you're not validating me. You're not seeing me. So that can bring up all those wounds. And so, but this idea that my commitment is to truth, like I'm not interested in consistency if it's a lie.
I used to think that I wasn't very nice. And so my goal was to be like be kind, smile, be sweet. And I actually have a huge issue with that, like that I'm called to be sweet. This is a highly personal share right now.
Yeah.
And when you're kind, it's actually easy to be kind. It just requires some manners. And I shake your hand and I smile and give you a hug and make you feel welcome.
Yep.
However, like you're talking about with boundaries and people saying, well, I actually don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable with this. And I can demonstrate the kindness to do that. Or I can make a choice and say, it's actually not kind to myself to get into a role that I'm not being honest about myself or about this relationship being healthy. And I think so many of us struggle with that. Is it right to be kind or is it right to be honest? And so I really appreciate you even tapping into that. Like the question of it is really something each of us has to answer, obviously.
It's very personal. It's very personal. Yeah, it does. And it may change based on case, right?
Case day.
Right.
So I love everything you're doing. Okay. So clearly you have a program. Clearly you have a system.
Yes.
What's the first step? How do people contact you? Like, tell me that process.
So first step is if you want to learn more, you can go to integratedmasculinity.com.
Okay.
And you can see a bunch of stuff on our website. You can take a free assessment of where you're at with the archetypes. We didn't talk a lot about the archetypes today, but
maybe
that's
another episode.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we use is the primary archetypes of the king, the warrior, the lover, and the magician. And we help men understand the shadows of those archetypes and then how to integrate them in a healthy way. So you can take a free assessment on how you're doing, where you're at with the archetypes. There's a bonus training there they could take from the website as well. We do free trainings every Monday, 9 a.m. Pacific time right now. And so we definitely welcome men to come to that because they're going to learn a lot more about what we do. And essentially, though, we have a membership program for men to come like multiple times a month, come together, do the hard work, get the coaching that you need to go forward as well. So we offer group coaching, one-on-one coaching for men who just want to go faster, right? There's sometimes men who are just, I'm ready to go. And sometimes men just like to go at a slower pace and it's all perfect. So I would start just by going to the website. If you want to reach out to us, they could reach out to us at info@integratedmasculinity.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on today. Again, we could speak for hours about this. So I definitely encourage everyone to log on and follow anything you can about this conversation. I have known you for years through social media and watched some essentially your lives.
Yeah.
Again, I am not your target audience by gender, but the content seems so incredibly relevant for today. Again, 2024, we are living in so many new ages, but each of us seems to be struggling with exactly the same things.
Yep.
No matter your gender, no matter your role, your position in or with yourself or in a relationship. I mean, these are just highly relevant topics. And I do believe in elevating ourselves, whether you believe in that's a consciousness or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Clearly that has to be part of the goal. So thank you so much for coming on. Absolutely brilliant episode. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
That has been today's episode of the Scottsdale Living podcast. Tune in next time for our next guest. And today has been Nathan Smith with Integrated Masculinity.